A car dealership manager confronts a black man entering the showroom, his tone sharp, his assumptions clear. This isn't the place for you. But little does he know, the man he's just kicked out isn't just a customer, he's about to sign the papers as the new owner of the dealership. Stick around to witness the ultimate reversal of power and a lesson this manager will never forget. We love to know where our viewers are watching our videos from. Drop your location in the comment below. Let's begin. The dealership gleamed under the afternoon sun. Rows of shiny cars sparkled like jewels, their chrome reflecting the bright sky. Inside, the showroom buzzed with energy. Salesmen shuffled papers, chatted with customers, and closed deals. Everything about this place screamed wealth and status. James walked in quietly. He wore a neatly pressed shirt and slacks, carrying himself with calm confidence. He wasn't flashy, but there was something about him that stood out like he belonged here in a way that wasn't obvious at first glance. He paused near a sleek, black luxury sedan, running his hand lightly along the hood. He examined the car closely, nodding as if he appreciated its craftsmanship. A few steps away, a man in a gray suit was watching him. The man was Mr. Grayson, the dealership manager. His sharp eyes narrowed as he took in James' simple clothes. To him, James didn't look like someone who could afford one of these cars. His lip curled with disdain. Grayson strode over quickly, his polished shoes clicking against the tiled floor. He stopped a few feet away, crossing his arms. "Can I help you?" His tone wasn't welcoming. James turned, offering a small smile. "Yes, I was hoping to ask about this model. I'm interested in buying it." Grayson's face hardened. "Buying? Look, sir, this isn't a place to browse around for fun. These cars are expensive. If you're just here to look, I suggest you head somewhere else." James blinked, caught off guard. He stood a little straighter. "I'm not here to waste time. I'm genuinely interested in this car." Grayson stepped closer, his voice lowering, but no less cutting. "Listen, we don't allow loitering here. You're making my other customers uncomfortable." He gestured toward a couple standing nearby, though they hadn't even noticed James. James took a slow breath, steadying himself. "I think you're misunderstanding." Grayson cut him off with a sharp wave of his hand. "I'm not misunderstanding anything. I've been managing this dealership for years, and I can spot someone who's not serious from a mile away. Now, if you're not buying, I need you to leave." The showroom grew quieter as people began to notice the exchange. Employees behind the counter glanced nervously at one another. A young salesman whispered to his colleague, "What's going on?" James looked around, feeling the weight of every stare, but his face remained calm. He met Grayson's gaze steadily. "You're making a big mistake." Grayson smirked, his confidence unshaken. "The only mistake would be letting someone like you waste my time." James didn't argue. He turned and walked toward the exit, his steps slow and measured. For a moment, it seemed as though he might turn back, say something else. But he didn't. The glass door swung shut behind him. The sound echoed in the suddenly still room. Outside, James paused beside a sleek, unassuming car parked near the entrance. He took out his phone, dialed a number, and waited. When someone picked up on the other end, James' tone was calm but firm. "I've been to the dealership." The manager made quite an impression. There was a brief pause, then James continued. "Yes, let's schedule the meeting for tomorrow. I'll make sure they remember this visit." Without another glance at the building, James got into his car and drove away. Back inside the dealership, Grayson stood with a smug expression, brushing imaginary dust off his jacket. "Some people just don't know their place," he muttered to no one in particular. But his confidence was misplaced. He didn't know who James really was or what was about to happen. And outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the glinting cars. The stage was set for a reckoning, and it was closer than anyone inside the showroom could have imagined. James sat in his car, the engine purring softly. The sleek vehicle wasn't flashy, but its quiet power mirrored James himself, controlled, capable, and ready. He pulled out his phone, his hand steady despite the heated exchange that had just taken place. When the call connected, a calm voice answered on the other end. "Mr. Miller, how did it go?" James gave a small, humorless laugh. "Exactly as I thought it might, Carl. The manager didn't even give me a chance to speak. He kicked me out before I could get a word in." Carl sighed. "I was hoping things had changed since we first talked about this purchase." James' expression softened, though his jaw remained tight. He looked through the windshield at the dealership's grand facade. "That's why I bought this place, Carl. My father walked through those same doors 30 years ago. He wasn't dressed like a big spender, so they treated him like dirt. Told him to leave. He worked his whole life to buy a car for our family, and they wouldn't even let him look around." Carl didn't respond immediately. He knew how deeply this moment meant to James. Your father would be proud of you, James. Taking ownership of the very place that turned him away. That's powerful. James nodded, his voice low. This isn't just about business. It's about making things right. For him and for everyone who's ever been underestimated. He adjusted his rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of the dealership's shiny logo. "Set up the meeting for tomorrow," James said firmly. "I want everyone there. Staff, managers, all of them." Carl chuckled lightly. "You're not going to fire anyone on the spot, are you?" James smirked. "Let's just say I'm giving them a chance to see who they're really working for. But no, I'm not acting out of anger. This is bigger than that." As James ended the call, his fingers tightened on the steering wheel. For a moment, he let himself feel the emotions stirring inside him, the frustration, the hurt, and the determination. Then he released a slow breath, put the car into gear, and drove off. Inside the dealership, Mr. Grayson leaned casually against a desk, smirking as he recounted the scene to one of his employees. "You should have seen the guy," he said, laughing dryly. "He walks in here, acting like he's going to buy a car, dressed like he just came from a hardware store." The younger salesman, Mark, shifted uncomfortably. Maybe he was serious. You never know, right? Grayson rolled his eyes. "Oh, please. I've been doing this job long enough to spot who's worth my time, and who isn't. And that guy? Not a chance. People like him don't buy cars here. They just waste our time." Mark glanced toward the door where James had exited. "Still, I don't know if it's right to judge people like that." Grayson waved him off dismissively. "Look, kid, let me give you some advice. In this business, you have to be tough. Don't let people like him think they can just walk in and play you. That's how you lose real customers, the ones with actual money." Mark didn't reply, but his face betrayed a flicker of doubt. Grayson, oblivious to the tension, leaned in closer and whispered conspiratorially. "Besides, let's be honest. He didn't look like someone who belongs here. People with money don't dress like that. They show it off. And if I'm wrong, well, too bad for him. He should have made a better impression." Grayson laughed at his own words, proud of the way he handled the situation. But his arrogance blinded him to the storm brewing just beneath the surface. That night, James sat in his quiet office at home, flipping through an old photo album. His father's smiling face stared back at him from a worn photograph. In the picture, his father stood proudly in front of a rusted old car, one he had worked tirelessly to buy after being turned away from the dealership. James ran his thumb over the image. "Tomorrow's for you, Dad," he whispered. His mind raced as he planned his next steps. He could confront Grayson immediately, demand an apology, or even fire him outright. But that wasn't James' style. He wanted to send a message, not just to Grayson, but to everyone in the dealership. The next morning, the dealership opened as usual. Grayson, dressed in his sharp gray suit, carried himself with the same air of authority. He was in charge, and he knew it. "Morning, boss," one of the salesmen said as Grayson walked past. Grayson nodded curtly, his mind already on the day ahead. But as he entered his office, a note on his desk caught his eye. It read, "Mandatory staff meeting at noon. Attendance required." Grayson frowned. "What's this about?" he muttered, tossing the note aside. He didn't like surprises. Meanwhile, James pulled into the dealership lot, his car blending in with the other luxury vehicles. Today, he wasn't just a man browsing for a car. He was the owner, and he was about to make sure everyone knew it. With every step he took toward the entrance, the tension in the air seemed to thicken. Something big was about to happen, and James was ready. Tomorrow, the dealership would be a different place, and by the time the meeting ended, no one, not Grayson, not the staff, not the customers, would ever see him the same way again. The dealership was bustling the next day, its usual energy amplified by a sense of anticipation. Employees whispered among themselves about the mysterious mandatory meeting. Grayson, as always, moved confidently through the showroom, his polished shoes clicking on the tiled floor. When the glass doors swung open, Grayson turned his head. Walking in was James, but this time he wasn't alone. Beside him were three sharply dressed individuals, James' lawyer, Carl, and two executives. They carried an air of authority, their purposeful strides causing heads to turn. Grayson's demeanor shifted immediately. His usual smug expression was replaced by a broad, welcoming smile. He smoothed down his tie and approached the group, his hand outstretched. "Welcome to our dealership," Grayson said warmly. "How can I help you fine gentlemen today? Are you interested in our premium models? We have a few in the back. I'd be happy to show you." James didn't immediately respond. He glanced around the showroom, his gaze calm but piercing. Finally, he shook Grayson's hand, his grip firm. "I'm here for the meeting," he said. Grayson's brow furrowed slightly. "The meeting? I wasn't expecting." His voice trailed off as he realized something was off. Carl stepped forward, handing Grayson a folder. "You'll want to review this before we proceed." Grayson hesitated but took the folder. As he scanned the documents inside, the color drained from his face. The papers confirmed what he hadn't suspected in his wildest dreams. James was the new owner of the dealership. Grayson looked up, his mouth opening and closing as if trying to form words. "That's right," James said, his voice steady and calm. "I own this dealership now." A murmur rippled through the room. Employees and even a few customers stopped what they were doing to watch the scene unfold. Grayson stood frozen, the weight of the revelation settling heavily on his shoulders. James took a step closer, his expression firm but not unkind. "I came in yesterday as a customer, Mr. Grayson. I wanted to see how things were run. I wanted to know how your team treats people. What I experienced." He paused, his voice catching just slightly. "What I experienced was disappointing." Grayson swallowed hard, his earlier arrogance now replaced with visible discomfort. "Mr. Miller, I had no idea." "That's the point," James interrupted. His voice wasn't angry, but it carried a strength that silenced the room. "You didn't know, and yet you judged me. You made assumptions based on nothing but how I looked. Do you know how many people have walked through these doors and been treated the same way? People who deserved respect, who deserved a chance." Grayson had no answer. His shoulders slumped slightly, his confidence eroding under the weight of James' words. James turned to address the employees who had gathered. "Let me tell you why I bought this dealership," he began. 30 years ago, my father walked into this very showroom. He wasn't dressed in a fancy suit, and he didn't have the look of someone wealthy. But he was a hard-working man who had saved every dollar he could to buy a car for our family. This place turned him away. They wouldn't even let him speak. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of a car engine being tested in the distance. James' voice grew softer, but no less powerful. "My father didn't fight back. He walked out, humiliated, and bought a car elsewhere. I was just a boy, but I'll never forget the look on his face when he came home that day. That's why I'm here, to make sure no one ever has to feel that way again." The employees shifted uncomfortably, Even Grayson seemed to shrink under the weight of James' story. James turned back to Grayson. When I bought this dealership, I hoped to come in quietly, observe, and then work with the team to make it better. Yesterday, I hoped to be welcomed as a customer. Instead, I was dismissed, kicked out, like my father was all those years ago. Grayson's voice finally returned, trembling. Mr. Miller, I am so sorry. I didn't mean. James raised a hand, stopping him. I'm not interested in excuses. I'm interested in change. The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone held their breath, waiting to see what James would do next. I could fire you right now, James said, his tone even. No one would blame me for it. But that's not how I want to start this journey. Grayson blinked, surprised. You're not firing me. Not today, James replied. You have a chance to prove you can do better. But understand this. Things will change around here. Respect will be the foundation of this dealership. Every customer, no matter who they are or how they look, will be treated with dignity. James turned to the gathered employees. That goes for all of you. If you can't meet that standard, this isn't the place for you. We're better than this, and it's time we prove it. The room remained silent for a moment longer before a quiet murmur of agreement spread among the employees. Grayson, humbled and shaken, nodded slowly. I understand, Mr. Miller. I'll do better. James nodded, his expression softening slightly. I'll hold you to that. As James walked away, the employees watched him with a mixture of respect and awe. The new owner had made his mark, not with anger, but with a powerful lesson. The stage was set for a new beginning, and the dealership would never be the same. The next morning, the dealership employees gathered in the conference room, their faces a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The mandatory meeting had been the talk of the showroom ever since the events of the day before. Grayson sat near the front, his usual confidence replaced with nervous silence. When James entered the room, all eyes turned to him. He stood at the head of the table, his calm demeanor commanding attention. Beside him stood Carl, his lawyer, holding a stack of papers. James began, his voice steady but warm. Thank you all for being here. I know there's been a lot of speculation about what happened yesterday. Today, I want to clear the air and talk about the future of this dealership. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. I'm not here to single anyone out or point fingers, but we need to address what's been happening. Yesterday, I experienced something that no customer should ever go through. I was judged unfairly and dismissed without being given the respect I deserved. The employees shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Grayson kept his head low, his face flushed with shame. James continued, his voice firm but compassionate. I want to be very clear. This dealership is entering a new chapter. We will not tolerate prejudice, assumptions, or disrespect of any kind. Every customer who walks through those doors will be treated with dignity, no matter who they are or what they look like. He glanced briefly at Grayson, then back to the room. But I also believe in second chances. No one here is perfect, and I don't expect perfection. What I do expect is growth. And to ensure we all grow together, I am implementing mandatory training for every employee. There was a murmur of surprise among the staff. James held up a hand to quiet them. This training will focus on respect, diversity, and understanding. It's not about punishment. It's about building a culture we can all be proud of. This isn't just about the way we treat our customers. It's about the way we treat each other as well. Grayson hesitated, then stood, his voice trembling slightly. Mr. Miller, I'd like to say something. James gestured for him to speak, his expression neutral. Grayson turned to face the room, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. I want to apologize, not just to Mr. Miller, but to all of you. Yesterday, I let my own assumptions cloud my judgment, and I embarrassed myself and this dealership. I've made mistakes, and I know I have a lot to learn. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. The room was silent for a moment before James spoke, his tone calm but resolute. Thank you, Mr. Grayson. But it's not me you owe an apology to. It's every person you've ever underestimated. This is bigger than one incident. It's about making sure no one else is treated the way I was, or the way my father was, years ago." Grayson nodded, his face reddening further. "You're right. I understand." James stepped forward, addressing the entire room. "Let me tell you what this dealership will be from now on. It will be a place where everyone feels welcome, where customers know they'll be treated fairly, and where employees respect each other. It's not just about selling cars. It's about creating a legacy we can all be proud of." He paused, his voice softening. "When I was a boy, my father dreamed of owning a car from this very place. He never got that chance. But today, I honor his memory by ensuring no one else is turned away because of how they look or where they come from." The room was quiet, the weight of James' words sinking in. Later that day, James stood outside the dealership, watching as workers installed the new sign. The bold letters gleamed in the sunlight. "Owned and operated by James Miller." A few employees stepped outside to join him, including Grayson. They stood together, looking up at the sign in silence. Grayson cleared his throat. "Thank you for giving me another chance, Mr. Miller. I won't let you down." James nodded, his gaze still on the sign. "I'm not looking for promises, Mr. Grayson. I'm looking for action. Time will show me if you mean what you say." Grayson nodded, humbled. As the workers packed up their tools and the last rays of sunlight reflected off the showroom's windows, James turned to the employees gathered behind him. "This is just the beginning," he said, his voice carrying a quiet strength. "What we build here will set the standard for how every dealership should operate. Let's make it something we can all be proud of." The employees nodded, a new sense of purpose filling the air. As James walked back into the dealership, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He wasn't just running a business. He was creating a space where everyone, customers and employees alike, could feel valued. The dealership wasn't just his now. It was his father's legacy, brought full circle. And as the door closed behind him, James knew he had finally made things right.